In this chapter, this kind of completes our general introduction to what is economics with a bit of a review from when you maybe had taken Econ 131, Principles of Macroeconomics. In that course, if you took it with me, we would have spent the middle third, the course is divided into thirds, and the middle third of the course was all about talking about the three kinds of economic statistics that you in the news probably hear economists talking about all the time. So much so that you think that is kind of a throwaway kind of economic term. Just like if you're talking about football, you would talk about a touchdown or you know um, something like that. Um, the big things for economists would be talking about GDP, which is a way of talking about production, unemployment, and then also talking about things like recessions and depressions. And then finally, a topic that's a little bit more, as I make this lecture today, a little bit more relevant would be inflation. Now, I'm going to start off, since this lecture will be used probably 2 semesters and then I'll make it again new. Um, Depending on what semester you are hearing this lecture, I'm going to be making a separate standalone lecture that will just talk about the inflation problem that's happening um, today as of January 2022. Okay, so let's start. I'm just going to skip over the chapter outline since we will cover everything here. But let's start with kind of the first big thing that distinguishes, or the first big way that we can talk about um, kinds of economics. And that would be that economists are generally separated into two groups: microeconomists and macroeconomists. And with microeconomics, what we're looking at is the individual decision making process, how individual consumers, individual firms make decisions. If you're thinking about it in terms of the course numbers here in the UH system, that would be Econ 130. And then we have macroeconomics, and I'm a bit more of a macroeconomics kind of person. It's macroeconomics that you probably hear the most about in the news. Um, and in macroeconomics, we're talking about the economy as a whole. And more specifically, we're talking about three um, big things. Generally, we're talking about GDP, which is production, talking about inflation, and we're talking about unemployment. And most likely, if you look on any news source that says anything about economics, it's probably going to mention what's happening with one of those three things. So let's start first with gross domestic product. Gross domestic product, or GDP, is the way that we're going to measure total production. And unlike when you took Econ 130, where the focus was how do we calculate it and whatnot, what I want to just do here is I want a very simple way of understanding what it is, just so you can tell me what it is. You're not going to be asked to calculate it in this class. And then a few simple discussions of what's counted in it and what's not counted in it. Again, if you took Econ 130, I would have talked about it in that class as well, but you may have forgotten it, or you didn't take it with me, and so whatever, the person didn't cover that in that kind of detail. um, what GDP, gross domestic product, stands for: it's the dollar value of the goods and services that are in their final form that are sold in the United States in a year. Meaning that it's produced and so it's produced within the United States. It's a final good that's being sold, and we're just capturing the dollar value of it. Now, what do all those aspects of that definition mean? So that's our three sub bullet points. Final sale means that we're not going to count intermediate production. What that means is that if I buy a new car and it's going to be the value of the car that's counted, not the gasoline that's in the gas tank, the 4 new tires on the car, the floor mats, all that's in the value of the car. If we were to count the tires in addition to the car, we would be double counting those items. And this one becomes a little bit more controversial. And we're only talking about goods that are sold in a formal marketplace setting. So sale implies exclusively market activities. Yesterday, I watched. I have 3 children. I watched all 3 of my children. My wife was at work. While she was at work, I then mopped the floor. Well, it's not like mop, like old school mop. It's it looks like a vacuum cleaner, and it sprays water and sucks up stuff. So I mopped the floor, vacuumed the carpet, watched all 3 kids. My wife had some deliveries she wanted me to make, so I threw all the kids in the back seat and drove around. That didn't generate any economic activity. All that work that I did, dude. When the day ended, I was exhausted. Didn't even come into work to make a lecture. I just went to sleep. Um, yeah, having kids is tough work. Should be tough work for everyone, right? Unfortunately, tends to be put a little bit more on women in their role as caregiver, but that's unfair when we talk about it in terms of measuring gross domestic product, because my wife went to work. She contributed to GDP. She, you know, bought and sold stocks and generated commissions, and GDP went up. But GDP did not go up because of me in any of the work that I did. Now, had I gone to work yesterday and hired a babysitter from a formal company, then GDP would have gone up. Same thing being done, kids being watched. But because I did it and I don't pay myself, it's not included in GDP. And then finally, for gross domestic product, we're talking about things that are produced within the United States. So things that are produced in countries other than the US, we are not going to include that in the gross domestic product. Um, a few nuances of this is that there are times when things are produced in one year and sold in another. So what happens there is that if the item is not sold yet, it is actually going to still be counted in the GDP. It's just going to go into this category known as investment. Just to review for us here. Sorry. GDP equals consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports, which is exports, what we sell to the rest of the world, minus imports, what we buy from the rest of the world. And so if I produce things in one year and then sell it in another, It is going to be counted in the year it's produced. It's going to be counted within the investments category. Okay. And then used car. I just bought a used car yesterday. Um, I've actually never owned a new car. I don't know. It just seems like a lot of responsibility. Kids are actually, I think, easier than having to worry and fuss over a new car for me. That did not add anything to the GDP. It's a perfectly fine car. I bought it from a coworker. Um, I think a, um, I think I got a good deal on it, but it doesn't matter. There's nothing that's in the GDP except for the fact that and she's not adding a markup from its purchase price. She's not running a business here, right? She sold me the car, told me a price. I paid her cash. Well, I paid her through PayPal. Um, GP was not affected, and it shouldn't be, because the car I bought, it's actually the newest car I've ever owned. It's from 2010. I know, like I'm entering now the modern era here. It's replacing my car from 2004. 2004. Oh man, I was a youngster. Um, in uh, 2004, well, in this case, sorry, 2010, the car was purchased by her and it was new. So it was part of GDP then. If I counted it in 2022, I'd be double counting that vehicle again. So I can't, I can only count it the first year. This doesn't just apply to cars. If we would think about like eBay, where there's obviously used goods being sold, even a pre-owned home, right? Or the home is not newly constructed. You'd add in real estate commissions and obviously any renovations you do or anything like that, but you're not going to count the entire house's purchase price. I bought a house last year. No, actually 2 years ago now. Jeez. I bought a house 2 years ago. It was built in 1988. Um, GDP was not affected. Now, if you were listening carefully to what I said that my wife went to work yesterday and my wife is in finance, and she bought and sold stocks. Now, the buying and selling of stocks themselves are not part of the GDP. But, dude, my wife doesn't work for free. My wife gets a commission. She gets a commission on sales, she gets a commission on purchases, she charges annual fees. All of that is her cost of doing business, and that is part of the GDP. Anything that is not legal is not part of GDP. So, um, if you buy um, tobacco, that's obviously a legal drug. But if I'm buying crack cocaine, that's not going to be part of GDP. If I'm buying meth, that's not going to be part of GDP. But if I buy medical marijuana, it would be. Um, Other things like prostitution, that would not be part of GDP unless we were in, Nevada. Um, Gambling would not be part of the GDP in Hawaii, but it would be part of the GDP, obviously, in Nevada. Um, so it has to be something that's legal within that jurisdiction, within that state, or within that country. And so we could imagine differences in different countries depending on what's considered legal or not. Okay, so that's GDP, calculated as everything spent on consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. Before we do this, let's go and look at what it is right now. So, for any economic data, I, as an economist, like to go to this website called FRED. It stands for Federal Reserve Economic Database. And what's cool about it is you don't have to know much about how to find the data, about how it's collected. Obviously, the Federal Reserve, the central bank, collects a lot of data. So they just combine it all. So we don't even have to type it in because this is a trending search term. So let's just click it. Okay. Now, what's cool about these graphs is you can actually manipulate them quite a bit. Um, and so we can see here that the gross domestic product since it was first collected in 1947 has increased dramatically. And even if we look at it over the past 10 years, so from 2011, because the data, we don't have yet the data um, for 2021 fourth quarter. Look at that. I mean, COVID obviously had a significant impact, bringing the economy from 21.5 trillion to 19 trillion, causing a recession, which is this gray region right here. Because then, if we obviously look at the entire data here, that's obviously the biggest decline. Certainly was the biggest decline I've ever encountered or had. And yet, it's now higher. So, when we think about COVID and the impact it's had on the economy, one of the things I want you to take away from this is that the throwaway line is, oh my God, the economy is so bad now because of COVID. You got to be more precise than that. From this data alone, it's not bad, right? From this data alone, the GDP is stronger than it's ever been. It's at its highest level. But the reality of COVID, right, is that it's obviously affected some families greatly, and other families have not been affected at all. So, um, if I was a hotel worker, obviously I would be greatly affected by the lingering impacts of COVID, and I'm about to be impacted more because all of the stimulus from all the funding from the federal government that went into um, helping me while I was unemployed has now gone away. So now I'm even in a worse position because now my unemployment's run out, and now any. I don't have any unemployment insurance or anything else like that. For others, right, the impact has been oriented around things like it's been oriented around things like distance learning and whatnot, where the distance learning has been, has required families to not be able to perhaps go to work. And so, because they can't go to work because they have to watch their children, then their income went down. So, what I'm trying to say here is that the impact of COVID has been differential. Okay, let's go back here. So now let's talk about prices. So when we talk about prices, we tend to use a measure called CPI, Consumer Price Index. So that might be what you've heard of before. And what it does to measure prices is it looks at a typical basket of goods that is purchased. And then what it does is um, it takes that and it looks at it over time. So what that means for us is that For the consumer price index, what it does is it looks at a basket of goods that consumers typically buy, and then how does that basket of goods change in price over time. It's an index number. And when you look at the CPI number, what we're calculating here is a percentage change in that index number. So that index number, right, in the base year, because there has to be some year that you kind of base everything off of, that base year is going to have an index number of 100. And then we're going to calculate the index number over time by looking at what did that basket cost? What was the total price cost of that basket in the year that we're concerned about, and divided by the price of the basket in the base year. So let's actually just calculate it. We need the CPI data for 2018. Let's go back to the very beginning here. See here, Fred? Look at that. CPI, Consumer Price Index. Let's click on it. Okay. So here I'm seeing a whole bunch of numbers, and I'm looking at it for 2018. Let's just do January of 2018. 248.721. Okay. The number itself doesn't matter. It's just an index number. Over the base, let's see what it was in 1998. Was it 100? No, it was not in our graph here. In 1998, it was 162. So now in the base year, 1983, it was 100, or pretty darn close to it. Right, somewhere in 1983, it's 100. So that's our base year ish. Sorry, I forgot already what we were at here. 162. Okay. And I'm going to do the math here. Sorry. And I get 148.04. Now, what is that telling us? What that's telling us is that prices increased 148% between 1998 and 2018. That's 20 years. So now let's divide that by 20. That gets us an average increase let's see here. Let me make sure. Sorry, I see an error here. You could average it, but I don't know if we should. Sorry, I just was recalculating this. I got 153.53. Doesn't really matter. That between 1998 and 2018, prices increased by a factor of 1.5, or much bit more than doubled. Let's see if the data, when we look at it graphically, if it represents that. Yeah. approximately. Now, what's interesting here, prepare your mind to be blown. The impact of COVID, look at what is the impact. Dramatically higher prices. This is the major economic problem that has to be addressed today. Um, is the fact that prices have gone up so dramatically. Let's look at this over the past 10 years. Now let's edit my graph, and I'm going to do. Mm, so what I did is I just changed it to what's the percentage change. So you can see from 1998, a typical year. Sorry, let's make this annual. Annual rate of change. Okay. So we can see here that prices around are changing about 2 to 3%, right? Without looking at all these numbers here, about 2 to 3%. Right, we have pretty significant changes here where prices did go down dramatically. That's what we would call deflation. Look at this. October 2021, prices went up 12%. Last time you'd see something like that, I remember my father was unemployed, which puts us in about the early 80s. Pretty significant. Okay. Um, to start to calculate some of the changes here, um, the percentage change, you can use an equation where you look at the where you calculate the percentage change over time. This isn't the math class. If you go on Google and you type in percentage change calculator, you'll see some pretty, let's go back to, let's just create something here. Google calculator. You don't really need to know how to do it anymore because there's apps out there that will do it for you. And if I do from V1 to V2, 248, from 162 to 248, yeah, we get our 53%. So that's our, right, our 53% increase. Divide that by 20, and you get your average change a little bit different now. So 53% increase, and that's what we saw right here, 53.53. The 100 coming from the fact that we had multiplied it by 100. Okay. Now, calculations of inflation are also skewed. One of the problems being that the basket itself stays pretty constant over time. So, as new goods are introduced, they're not going to be counted in the GDP initially. Additionally, and I think this one's pretty important, is the fact that goods are different, right? So, yeah, we're still saying people buy a car, but my father tells this story of the first new car he ever bought. And it was a 1974 Chevy Nova. As I remember it, The car lasted about 10 years. It almost made it to 100,000 miles. Um, it didn't have things like air conditioning or anything like that. Um, it was not dependable. The price of the car new, I think, was about $4,000. And that was 1974. 26, 46 years later, you can buy a new car. I think you can get a new car. The cheapest new car out there today is about $15,000. Let's just take the cheapest one. So now you would say, oh my God, cars have tripled in price. Things are so expensive. Well, today's car is much safer, much more reliable. It's just a better thing. The quality has gone up. So again, and this is kind of the equivalent too of your grandparents or someone saying that something used to cost, a nickel or a penny or a dime, and today it costs so much. Well, that's inflation, but also the things are probably higher in quality. Um, People do change where they buy goods and services, trying to seek out cheaper things. And online has made it much more difficult to track prices because people aren't going to traditional stores. In the measurement of inflation, they do take into account that people do buy things virtually, but not everyone buys stuff on Amazon, right? You can do those um, you can buy new stuff on eBay, right? And then there's like those auction sites, where people you've seen the commercials maybe on TV where people say, "I paid $30 for this new couch," that kind of thing. The other problem with the inflation number is that we don't allow people to substitute. We assume that people buy the same basket of goods over time, which just does not happen. And the one example we have that's happening right now is that um, beef has gone up dramatically in price during COVID. And so people are substituting away from more expensive beef to cheaper pork. CPI does not take that into account. The people at the Bureau of Labor Statistics that do collect this data, they have tried to fix some of these problems, but in general, the number still is a little bit too high. It's high by about 1%. Doesn't matter because right now, the inflation rate right now is very high. In fact, I had just written it down here for a different picture. 7%. What kind of number do we like to see there? Economists like to see a number of about 2%. So it's about triple, over triple what an economist would like to see. So the only other thing then that we as economists then try to do is we try to take out of our measurement of CPI some of the more volatile things. And so what we might look at is something called the core CPI. And in core CPI, what we do is we remove volatile food and energy costs. Even if we do that for today's economy right now, where it's 7% in December, it's still at 5.5%. That's the highest number since 1991 for the inflation rate right now. That 7% number, that's the highest since 1982. So we are in a historically high inflation period of time as I make this lecture in January of 2022. Um, Other ways that we could measure inflation would be what's called the PCE, the personal consumption expenditure. What it does is it looks at what people are actually buying, so you would have some of the substitution problem resolved. And then again, you could take out food and energy prices and get what's called a core PCE. Alternatively, you could try to predict future consumer inflation by the higher prices that businesses are paying. and you would measure those costs that businesses are paying with what's called the producer price index. Um, you can see this data here. You don't get too caught up in this, though. This is just slightly alternative ways of, right? So this big one here would be if we look at the CPI, how much it fell. Well, we know that things like energy costs and whatnot fell dramatically. But if we take them out and we just look at the core, right, it's not as big of a decline. Um, I've already talked about how to calculate some of these things. Um, but again, I'm not asking that you calculate any of those things in this course. This course is more about talking about economic issues. So, in some sense, you can talk about how inflation is affecting your family, or how maybe the thing that you're involved in as a business maybe isn't counted as part of GDP because you I don't know sell illegal firecrackers. I don't know. Um, and the person that sells firecrackers in Hawaii is still, I think, contributing to GDP, but we're obviously not going to count it because in that case, fireworks are not legal here. Now, how do we see some of these things captured in terms of um, in terms of CPI? Well, the biggest way we see it is what's called a COLA, a cost of living adjustment. You see these in Social Security payments. Um, Social Security payments go up by the COLA, and it's basically just a reflection of how much did your spending power of a fixed amount go down because of the fact that there's inflation. And that's what brings us to who are the losers and winners from inflation. Um, well, people on a fixed income are losers because their fixed income amount isn't necessarily going up with inflation. Maybe if it's like Social Security, there is a COLA. But if you're getting money from like an annuity or a pension, it may not go up with inflation. So your set amount is then just losing its purchasing power. And then lenders lose as well, lenders of money. So, just as my own personal example, um, I bought a house in 2020. Um, that interest rate is a 30-year fixed interest rate. So there was a presumption that the inflation rate would be a certain amount. And it's obviously not worked out to be that way. So my income, right, which may adjust for inflation, is going up, but my interest rate is not. Thus, it makes it easier to pay off my loan. So in this case, I'm a winner because I'm a borrower. And that's all about expectations. So you may have just heard me say, right, in 2020, when the bank made me out the loan, they thought inflation rates were going to be low. And it turned out that they were wrong. And not to beat my own chest or say I'm such a great economist, but I did think that we would be in this situation. Now, how is that, Shiting? Like, what are you shiting? Do you read, a crystal ball and you see that that's going on? No, 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 no. Shiting's got no crystal ball. Instead, I look at the money supply and look at what the money supply has done since the start of COVID. So this is how much money exists out there. It went from $15 trillion to $21 trillion. That's an increase of almost 50%. in the amount of money that we have out there. More money out there means that each dollar out there is now less valuable. And so by the time I bought my house and was getting my mortgage in September, already by then, we were seeing an increase of almost 20%. So I knew, dude, something's going to happen here. And so all the debate right now about controlling inflation is now all about reducing the money supply. Let's look at this. I want to show you just a small example here. So look at what happened here. So the money supply grew dramatically as well in the 1970s, contributing to very high inflation. And the only way you can change it then is by changing the amount of money supply you have out there. And, well, the best way you can do it here, let's just look at this. Federal funds rate. The only way you can do it to remove dramatically high inflation. Ooh, let's do this. Add a line, CPI. There. Add data series. Annual. No. Monthly. And compound annual rate of change. And quarterly average. Let's do that. So let's just look at this really cool graph I just made just on the fly there. The only way, so what you can see right here, so the blue line represents basically the interest rate in the overall economy, and the red line represents the inflation rate. When inflation is high, as it was here in the late 70s, early 80s, the only way you can reduce the inflation rate, as is done right here, is by raising the interest rate, the blue line. So what that means, if we just really focus on the past 5 years, if we're seeing a red line that's growing really, really high, what does it mean they're going to have to do to the blue line to make the red line start to go down? They're going to have to raise the blue line quite a bit. Thus, the loan that was made to me in October of 2020, Central Pacific Bank thought they were going to make some money on me. With a federal funds effective rate of nearly zero and an interest rate that's charged me of 2.875%, but they thought they would make, after all expenses and whatnot, about 2% a year on me. Not a big margin, but that's something, right? For lending to a credit risk where, dude, I'm paying my mortgage. There's no chance I'm not. So then it's kind of like easy money, but now it's not. It's turning out to be a bad bet now. And it's a bad bet because if the inflation rate is 7%, and I'm only paying 2.875, they're losing 4.175%, right? 7 minus 2.875. They're losing 4.175% in purchasing power. Sorry, Central Pacific Bank. I liked it better when they had that dog that lent money, not this cartoon characters thing. Okay. So what that gives rise to is this idea that we also need to If we're looking at GDP, we may want to look at real GDP, which is essentially taking the GDP and adjusting it for inflation, um, which is important to do. I don't know why the book decided to talk a long time about it. Let's just skip over this for right now so that we can talk about unemployment, the third of the major economic statistics here. Um, we take the total population and we start to divide it out. And the first big division in the total population would be in the labor force and not in labor force. Let's just get what those numbers are. Let's not talk about this theoretically. Let's get it. Now let's use the Federal Reserve Economic Database. Okay, so it's 162 million. Okay. Oh, yo, what did I just do? Sorry about that. Total population. So we have a labor force of 162 million, and then not in labor force. Um, which is 99. Let's just call it 100. So 100. Sorry. So if we add those two up, that's going to give us what's called the civilian non-institutional population. Let's just confirm that it's about 262. Come on, Fred. Civilian. Let's go to the direct website. Let's see if I'm correct or not. Yeah, 262. Right here. Here we go. So the number's not lying. That's not actually the number of people in the U.S. though, because that would be 262 million, and then we need to add to that kids, people in hospitals and in prisons, so we call those people institutionalized, and people in the military. Let's see if we can get that data here. Civilian institutionalized population. Yeah, we can't get that. They don't have that data here. And we'll have that. And I don't see it. Sorry. So some wait there. I'm sure I just have to look more, but we would be able to add those two together, and that will equal my total population. The unemployment rate comes down from this labor, and it's going to be employed and unemployed. It's two boxes. So if we take my 162, which is my civilian labor force, and my 100, that's my not in the labor force, of that 162, there are two categories, employed and unemployed. These two numbers should add up to 162. Let's see if they do. So of the 162, there's a 155.9. $155.9, and I think this was about 6.3. Yeah, and those would add up to more or less 162. So then the unemployment rate is that 6.3 over the 162 times 100. And that gets you about 3.88%. Let's confirm. Yeah, 3.9%. Let's talk about those numbers and what are we representing, what are we not. One of the things that we need to look at is what's called the labor force participation rate. How many people are actually looking for a job? That sadly has been going down. The next slide actually shows the data. Nothing bothers me more than old data. It's just such a turnoff. Let's look at what it is. And that's what we see. One of the concerning things about COVID has been that people have just decided not to be in the labor force anymore. And then people said, oh, it's because the federal government's giving so much money to people to not work, so we need to get rid of it. Yeah, some people did go back, but it's not the same as it once was. And it's not even equal across the genders. For women, the decline was a bit less. Than for men. Where, if anyone's looking at this, actually, let's edit graph, add line. Let's just add women in there. So look at that. There was a dramatic change for both men and women. And I'll zoom in on the data a little bit more here on COVID. But basically, over time, women have been entering the labor force and men have not. Whereas it was once a male dominated workplace, it's less so. Let's focus on the past 5 years. Let's edit the graph more. And so look at what's happening right there. So what we're seeing right here, you see how the red line's higher there? Women have come back into the labor force much more so than men. Back, just look at this for a year. And we see this as well. The women are just getting back in there. Okay. We've already talked about this, so I'm not going to say more about it. What are the numbers not telling us about what's going on with unemployment? Well, part of the problem is that it's not counting individuals who are what we would call underemployed. So to be underemployed means that you've got a job, so you're counted as employed, but you are only getting 30 hours at work, or you're working at a job that doesn't require your college degree. So you're counted as employed, even though not a great job. Then we've also got the discouraged worker effect. In the discouraged worker effect, what we're saying here is that if you become so discouraged that you stop looking for work, then you won't be counted as employed. And then as the news gets better, then people like flood in to look for work, causing the unemployment rate to go up. So what we see with the discouraged worker effect is that the unemployment rate actually goes down as the economy does much worse. And then when the economy just starts to do a little bit better, the unemployment rate actually goes up because of the encouraged worker effect. Okay. So, and we can see some of this actually here. And let's just go back here. And go here. So what this gives us is different levels of measuring unemployment. The one we typically see, the headline one, the one that's called the official unemployment rate, that's actually what's called U3. So that's our 3.9%. If we look at U6, which is counting a whole bunch of other people that are unemployed for other economic reasons, it's well over 7%. Let's look at what it was. A tables. And let's look at U6, which is our highest measure of unemployment here. And let's look for the pandemic here. Look at that. An unemployment rate that's almost 23%. During the worst part of the Great Depression, it was 25%. So that's how bad COVID was. Pretty bad. Because it represented an economy that basically did shut down temporarily in 2020. So then we can think about the different ways of measuring that unemployment, that individuals can be cyclically unemployed just because of how the economy changes over time. They can be seasonally unemployed, right? That would be like people who lose their jobs Like if I'm got a gray beard and I play Santa Claus at the mall, right? We know come Easter time, I'm going to be out of work, right? Well, come Valentine's Day, I'll be out of work. Structurally unemployed means I've lost my job because I have a skill set that's no longer needed. So if I know how to like cobble shoes or fix 8-track players, that would make me structurally unemployed. And then frictionally unemployed is really not that worrisome of an economic problem because all that represents is being unemployed just because it takes me a little bit of time to find new work. Okay, so I don't want you to worry about this because we're already talking quite a bit here and I don't want to go into more detail than we need to. Same with this. And to be honest, same with this. I'm not going to worry about that. So, the final thing that we want to talk about here is just the fact that economies do move in cycles. It's what's called the business cycle. So this is the last major thing I want to cover in this chapter and in this discussion. So in the business cycle, we talk about an economy following a pattern where the economy um, is at a low point, which we would call a trough, and then improves. That's our recovery and our expansion until it reaches a peak and then declines. Why it reaches these points and why it follows this cycle has been the macroeconomic question of all time. People have been thinking about business cycles for a very long time. If you go to the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER's website, they have entire committees that try to date when business cycles are occurring. But that economies kind of go through this kind of path where the economy gets better and then reaches a peak and then falls and then repeats itself. So we can go to the NBER, National Bureau of Economic Research, and go to their business cycle dating committee. Can you see that cyclical pattern here in how the GDP is moving over time? Where a recession stands for 2 quarters of economic decline, 2 consecutive quarters of economic decline. We did officially reach one in 2020 during the pandemic. We can look at these dates. And so here you can just see the measurements. They actually went all the way back to pre-Civil War to measure how long these things occurred. And you can kind of see some of that data here. Okay. We don't need to talk about deflation, but let's just talk in the last comment about a depression. Well, I've never lived through a depression. I'm not that old. Yeah, COVID was bad, but um, uh, there was less talk of a depression during COVID than there was during the 2008-2009 financial crisis. And the reason why that was more like the closest we would have come to a depression is because the entire financial system shut down. No one was lending anyone anything. And credit lending money gives life to a modern economy. And the sudden removal of it destroys the economy quickly and swiftly. And back in September of 2008, That's where we were at. We were probably less than 24 hours away from entering a depression back in September of 2008. We avoided it barely, and then we just had years of not a lot of economic growth until 2013, 2014, and then you really saw it increasing even more in 2015, 2016. The lessons that were learned from the 2008 2009 financial crisis were used to make the COVID recession not reach a depression. Because the thing that the Federal Reserve did is it swiftly made sure that people could get loans. I didn't have that much of a problem getting a mortgage for over $1 million 6 months after COVID happened. So that's testament to how much credit must have been out there. Okay, we're not going to have to do this, so don't worry about that. Okay.